This is WPSL Port St. Lucie, the talk of the Treasure Coast.
.06 at WPSL 1590, the talk of the Treasure Coast. Time for Ask the Rabbi on WPSL.
And this is Rabbi Shafir Lobb trying to go live on Facebook, and it's not letting me this morning. So we'll see if it decides to change its mind.
Cranky Facebook.
It is being cranky today.
Well, you'll be on YouTube later.
Yes, that is true. I will be on YouTube, and YouTube does work. So thank you, everyone. And we'll see if that decides to come alive or not. Maybe I'll try the phone. What can I say? Try the old standby. Sometimes one will work and sometimes the other. And isn't that the way life is? Sometimes this and sometimes that. We can either choose to be upset. This one will go live. Okay, we'll live on the phone, but not on the iPad. No idea why. So here we are. We are going live on my phone, and we're live.
Now, hopefully your phone battery will hold on.
My phone battery will be fine.
Yeah.
The joys of technology. You know?
Oh, gosh. Can you imagine? Our grandkids.
We'll have no perception.
I still love. There was a thing that was posted on Facebook about a year ago. And I reposted it again this year. The rotary dial.
Yes.
And they had a bunch of students standing around.
Yeah.
They had no clue what it was.
The other meme along those lines that I really love is people are on let's see if I can do this. Working with the phone, it's a little bit. I've gotten used to the iPad, just so there. So anyway, the meme is the old payphone, and somebody's trying to take a selfie with the receiver. So life is what it is.
We were watching an old Law and Order thing. And, they're running down this sidewalk, and you see New York Telephone Company and an old phone booth. And I'm thinking, man, boy, that's an old show.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so funny.
Well,
Wow.
it's kind of funny. And, one of the, I was just discussing with, not discussing with let me, easy for me to say. So Sharon, you can laugh. I was talking to Sharon earlier and my tongue was not working, was wrapping around my eye teeth, and I couldn't see a word I was saying. And it seems like it's still that way. But anyway, so I was showing a video to my students. I show a video that's a clip from Star Trek.
Oh, okay,
it's the Next Generation, right? And they've all got little PDAs, right? And they don't use them quite the way people use cell phones. It's you can tell that they're just not used to using them.
It's kind of like a walkie-talkie type thing with them.
Yeah, it's more a walkie-talkie, and they treat it differently than we treat our phones. So there's just a couple of very different subtleties. So I always have to point out to the students that those things didn't really exist when Gene Roddenberry thought of Star Trek and he thought of the need for these little devices. There were not cell phones.
Right.
There were not tablets. And yet the idea that we were going to need something along those lines was already there, which is actually a perfect segue into one of the other things, right? Because you just said kids are not going to understand when they use the current technology that Moses didn't have. Right? Last week I joked.
He had a tablet.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, and we joked, right? Because I have that cartoon on Facebook.
Which also is a classic.
Right, which is another classic, which is, Moses walking down with two iPads, two tablets. And we get that, right? But, Next Generation may think that that's exactly how it really went down, because we tend to not realize that things change, that what we have now is not what has always been. And, and that's why our grandparents and our great-grandparents are using flip phones, because that's what they're familiar with.
Yeah.
And, that was a big step for them to go to,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, can you, I don't know if you remember, but way back when, you used to go to a friend's house and you didn't call home to tell your mom that you got there. You know, the next thing she knew is when you came home, it either was before or after your curfew.
I used to have to ride my bike to get home. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Well, kids still ride bikes, so.
Yeah, that's true.
They still ride bikes. They chain them to the stop signs, and that's kind of a cool thing around
It's
here.
kind of sad too. But,
it is.
You know, it's
Well, to have to chain it, yeah.
yeah.
Well, you know, but school's not where it used to be. School was where you could ride your bike to school.
Right.
But now kids go to school much farther away from their homes because our transportation system is so much better, in part, and obviously partially because of segregation and busing and all those other new concepts in schools, magnet schools and charter schools and those sort of things that attract from a wider area than used to be the case. And so times change. And we often look back and think that time has always been as it is right now. Right? You know, and people remember, you know, Sharon's posting her first phone. People remember their first phone, but they don't remember what life was, you know, a couple of generations before that when the technology was that much earlier. And so I'm going to fast forward into one of Stuart's and mine favorite discussions, which is a little bit about the story of creation in Genesis. There are 4 creation stories, you can count them, in the book of Genesis.
Okay.
And if you actually read the text, which I know a lot of people who quote it haven't.
Do what?
Read it.
Read.
Yeah, read.
Let me take that down. I haven't done that in a while.
I understand that. A lot of people, you know, something like 80% of college graduates never pick up another book, which is just sobering, you know. The world of video. Yeah. And the Bible is one of the most often owned and least read books around. Granted, you know, it's a big book. It's a heavy book. And, you know, and then we're not even going to start to get into the issues of translation because that's a whole nother kettle. And that's a big kettle. But let's go.
I was going to say,
yeah,
that's
it's a huge kettle. And so there's 4 creation stories in the book of Genesis. And one of those talks about 7 days.
Right.
On the first day, God created light. That's all God creates on the first day. And so let us look at, you know, one of the things that I like to tease students with, you know, is what time is it right now? And, you know, a couple of them will flip their Apple Watch or their iPhone, more commonly their iPhone or their tablet. They'll look down at it and say, well, you know, it's 11:14 right now or whatever it is.
I would have to do that too now.
You know, yeah. Well,
I don't have a watch.
Right, I look at your wrist and my wrist. We're not wearing watches anymore.
Right.
And because the time is more accurate on the digital devices that talk to the towers, that talk to the world clock that is in Boulder, Colorado. That's how they know.
The atomic clock.
The atomic clock. And it's nicely sunk down so that in case of an earthquake or atomic attack, or nuclear attack rather, hopefully the world clock survives. Because, you know, it's important. But God didn't, you know, say, let me put in a world clock in Boulder, Colorado. First of all, you had to have a Boulder, Colorado. So you kind of had to, you know, America had to get that far west. It didn't start at Colorado. Colorado is one of the later states. And I realize that some folks in Colorado realize that.
So what happens to Colorado if there's a major eruption at Yellowstone National Park?
Well,
hopefully,
hopefully it won't be close enough to the clock to create a problem. We'll find out.
Yeah.
We'll find out if and when it happens. But be that as it may, the Swiss movement was brought by the Arabs to Europe because for them it's important what time of day to pray.
Oh.
Right? The Bible doesn't have hours in it. It has watches. There aren't as many watches in a day as there are hours. You know,
Wait a minute, back up.
A watch was the amount of time that a guard could stay on duty.
Oh, I got you. Okay, yes,
Okay, so you had first watch, second watch,
Right,
third watch,
right.
which makes a lot of sense. You know, if you're watching sheep or you're watching the towers of a city.
An agrarian society.
An agrarian society where, it's different. And so ours doesn't come from the Middle East. It comes from Asia. It's another invention, the 60-minute hour, 12 hours and 12 hours, 24 hours in a day.
So that came from Asia.
Yeah, it's a much later.
Wow.
Yeah. So, we've got stuff going up and down the Silk Road, and there's a great song that's out there called I Taught Aristotle, or I Taught Alexander the Great. I'm Aristotle the Great. It's kind of a cool song. It's a fun history song. There's a guy out there who writes educational songs.
Okay, yeah.
And he uses the melody of "It's All About the Bass," right? And it's kind of cute. And there's a line in there that is really powerful, and it says, Aristotle, or Alexander rather, conquered all of the lands that he conquered, and he mixed up the traditions, which is a great line. And it's very true. When Alexander the Great went in and brought Greek culture, he also absorbed things that were local that he thought were worthwhile or that people wouldn't give up, because he was trying to homogenize a culture. And so stuff got mixed up. And so many times people acquired things, and since we've had them for 2,000 years, we think that's forever.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And it's not. It's not.
Well, it would be for our point of reference in the U.S., which is such a new country.
It is, but even in the 200 plus years, because I remember 1976.
I know. Yeah. Yes.
Well, hopefully the next generation will hit the next one. Hopefully we'll still be here and strong and at 300. I'm not going there.
I was going to say. That depends on who you listen to in the political spectrum right now.
Fear is always a popular peddler device. But anyway, so the invention of hours as we know it and the 24-hour day is actually much more recent than most people realize. It's a fairly recent invention. So here's a couple of other things, right? What's the definition of a day? What is a day? It's the time it takes for what? What defines a day on our planet? And anybody is, by the way, welcome to join in this conversation. Give me a call at 772-340-1590. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chayim.
Well, it's a full 24 hours, right?
It's 24 hours, but what happens in 24 hours? How did they originally decide to call a day?
Would it be sunrise to sunrise, maybe?
Yeah, well, or sunset to sunset.
Like that,
It's the time it takes for the Earth to turn on its wobbly axis and face the same place toward the sun as it was the previous day. So it's one revolution of the Earth, right? The sun doesn't go around the Earth. Every once in a while, I get somebody who says that to me, but it's the Earth that's rotating on its axis. And here's the piece, right, that science tells us, and evidence of it's all over. The Earth wobbles. And because of that wobble, here's a really critical piece. Every day is not 24 hours. Some days are 24 hours and a couple of seconds, and some days are 23 hours, 59 minutes, and some seconds.
Well, in the summer solstice, right?
Well, and of course, there's all kinds of different things around, but it's about the Earth revolving, and the Earth revolves pretty steadily. We're in a different place in the sun, so the length of the daylight hours and the length of the night hours changes, more so in the north than it does here in Florida, but more here than it does at the equator.
So then with our movement, the north and south poles and the ice caps and all the other stuff move around too.
Right, everything moves.
Everything
moves, So when you're singing, right, I feel the earth move under my feet, aside from California, it's still true for everybody. Right? Things are moving. We're in motion. We're moving through the universe. We're moving through our solar system. We're moving through our galaxy. We're in a lot of different fields of motion. And all of those combine with the wobble, and days are not exactly 24 hours. So already there's some stuff there. Ours are our invention over the watches. And here's the piece about the watches. The watches were longer in summer and shorter in winter for the daylight watches, and the opposite for the nighttime watches, because they had 4 watches in daylight and 4 watches in dark.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So
So much for my sundial.
yeah, well, the sundial, right, measures the same number of hours every day, no matter what time of year it is, so some hours are longer than other hours. Sundial is not the same 60-minute hour that we have now. 60 minutes was
I saw one of those at the museum in Tucson. Yeah.
Somebody got smart and stuck a stick in the ground and said, hey, look at that, if the shadow moves. And when it's in this position, it's high noon, and they kind of adjusted it a little bit for time of year and some other. They tried to get fancy after a while when time moved on and became a joule movement. And, of course, even the joule movement today is passé, because now we've got digital watches and we've got cell phones and watches that talk to cell towers and find out what time
And
it is.
the Papago Indians were big at teaching at the University of Arizona and like time stuff.
Time stuff. Time has changed. Time has changed dramatically. You can Google some of these things that I'm talking about. This is not rocket science. It's not a revelation or anything. These are things that we've understood. So what does it mean? Here's the other big piece out of the creation story with the 7 days. In order to have a revolution of the earth, you kind of need a sun, moon, and stars. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't happen until Tuesday.
Wait a minute.
It doesn't happen until Tuesday.
Okay.
Right?
So there was light on day 1.
Yeah.
And sun, moon, and stars.
On Tuesday.
Sounds like God was sleeping something off here.
I don't think God was sleeping something off. God was doing, God's thing. And who are we to dictate to God what a God day is?
Yeah, true.
There's an old joke out there that says, God, what's a day to you? It's 1,000 days, right? Because it's a God number.
Mm-hmm.
And so the guy says, give me $1 and it'll be $1 million. And God says, sure, in a minute. In a God minute, right? Yeah.
It's cute. I like that. Yeah, that's cool.
But the bottom line is that who are we to take our finite understanding of time that we've created to make our lives manageable? And why do we need that? So that money can transfer from one account to another at a split second. It's the only thing that's really, really super critical. Time is used as a shorthand in some navigation things, and it's certainly helpful for airplane schedules. But the bottom line is, if an airplane is a minute late, unless it's encroaching on space of another aircraft, which that's a real-time movement. Yes, they plan out the flight plans to try to make that less likely to happen, but in the end, when two airplanes are seemingly converging, there's hopefully a traffic controller who's awake and moving them to at least different altitudes. It's worth noting that a near miss is a lot closer than cars pass each other on a highway.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
We were involved. Carol was unfortunately anchoring some worldwide coverage of the PSA air disaster in San Diego. And it was 5 days later when we were involved coming back from a Chargers road trip in a similar situation in the identical spot with a light plane almost cutting us off with the Charger football team on it.
Okay.
And that was a very scary situation. Thank God we had a pilot who was a former NOM jockey, and he got us out of the way, but by just a matter of feet.
Yeah. Well,
it was scary.
Well, I'll share kind of an interesting piece along those lines as a pilot. I was taking off from the Allegheny Airport outside of Pittsburgh, and it was a particularly windy day. And the rule was that you didn't contact Pittsburgh Center until you either got outside the airport perimeter or you got to 3,000 feet, whichever happened first. And most of the time, you hit the perimeter fairly quickly. But this was such a high wind day that my little airplane was almost, going almost vertically up. And so I'm out of line of sight of the person in the tower.
Ooh.
I'm still talking to tower. I'm still on tower frequency. They haven't handed me off. They've forgotten about me because I'm a little airplane.
Oh, boy.
And another airplane gets cleared for takeoff.
Oh.
And it's right underneath me. And I popped on the line right away, and I said, be advised I'm making a hard left because I'm still over the runway.
Oh.
And the other airplane was rolling, and he said, we'll make a hard right. So there's two pilots, being intelligent about it. But it's, there was one thing that I always used to tell my flight students, which is that, listen to the traffic controller, do what they say, but don't ever put yourself in danger. The farthest they're going to fall is off their chair.
Yeah. It's funny because pilots had talked for years about how dangerous flying into Lindbergh Field was in San Diego. And there's so many small airports, if you will, that kind of dot that I-10 corridor. And you just think, or I-8 corridor, I should say. And it's amazing.
Yeah. And then you add little drone things and all kinds of stuff that's in the air.
I can't even imagine what they're going to go through now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you've now added a whole different thing. And, of course, if Amazon gets its way, they will have 20,000 drones flying around.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And let's hope they stay out of the flight paths.
Exactly.
And much harder, of course, when you're dealing with the little airplanes, which can handle it much worse. Right? A drone and a propeller are not going to be friends. They're both going to lose.
That's right.
That's one of those cases where even if you tie, you lose.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
we have 2 days, light, then stars on day 2.
Day 3.
What about day 3?
No, that is day 3.
That is day 3. Okay.
Tuesday is 3.
Okay.
Sunday is 1. Monday is 2.
Okay.
Tuesday is 3.
Yep.
Right. So, you've got God days before you've got that which defines a day. And what if we're on Mars? Or what if we're on somewhere else? What are we going to do then?
Oh, great.
Yeah. The days are different. The days are different.
Okay.
Yeah. So the idea of day is a human construct that we've defined according to Earth, and it's approximate. And it's not, we live in a world of approximate. It's 365 and a quarter kind of sort of days to go around the sun. And it's changing. And the rotation of the planet is changing. And right now we're going through one of those pole changes that happens every once in a while, where the North Pole is going to become the South Pole, and et cetera. So there's lots of things going on. And, a lunar month is 29 and a half kind of sort of days. You got these whole bunches of kind of sortas, and then you've got pi, right? 3.1415 with all of its numbers.
Oh, boy, I haven't heard that in a long time.
Right?
Yeah.
So we're not dealing with you would think that if the idea was to make it something, really simple and obvious, like a day as a fixed amount, then you wouldn't have all these quarters and halves and fractions and minutes and partials and da-da-da. So we have, the leap year, the calculation for the Gregorian calendar, which is the calendar that now is at 2019 years and into its 7th month. That calendar replaced the Julian calendar. It was a Gregorian calendar. But it has a leap year, and it's not even every 4 years. People think it's every 4. It's every 4 years unless divisible by 100 and it is again when it's divisible by 400, because it's 365.
Whoa, back up. Now you're losing me. Whoa.
Yeah. Right. So 2000 was a leap year because it was divisible by 400.
Okay.
But it wouldn't have been at 1900. That was not a leap year.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Because they've got to have this adjustment in it. And even so, it was 2 years ago, we had a leap second. Because the timing isn't quite perfect and they have to constantly readjust the world clock. But it's done on a schedule and it's done by consensus with all parties.
Mm-hmm.
So the way we measure time is human. It's not God's time. That's our time. And we use it for our purposes. And to take that and force God into that little peg hole just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. It's also somewhat arrogant, I think. But that would be me.
Well, that's the humans.
Yeah, humans are very arrogant.
Yeah.
We
No,
are.
it's, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
The world was created for us.
Well, and Rabbi Nachman said that there's two things that you should always have in your pocket. One is the world was created for me, and in the other pocket you put I'm nothing but dust and ashes. Right? And that way, depending on whether you're in your manic mode or your depressive mode, you pull out the appropriate message and get yourself back on an even keel.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Right? Because we have those balances. And we oscillate. We oscillate from highs to lows, even if whether we're, manic depressive is like really the extreme, going into the super frenzied, happy, active, whatever, and going into the flat dead on your bed mode. But most of us oscillate somewhere in between that. You go high, low, you're happy,
Sure.
you're not so happy, you're tired, you're rested and energetic, you're energized. We all have cycles. And those things rotate and move. And even the ancients recognized the difference in planets. Planets are stars that move backward every once in a while. Mercury retrograde,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's a function of the way that that they were able to figure out that there were planets rotating around the sun. They knew that the Earth was not flat and that the sun did not go around the Earth.
The Earth isn't flat?
The Earth isn't flat.
Film 11.
Yes. Well, I get a kick out of when people say, "Well, Columbus went to no." Columbus was looking for a shorter way to India because he didn't like going down around the Cape down in South Africa because we didn't have the Suez Canal yet. Suez Canal cuts a lot of shipping time.
Sure.
From Asia to Europe and to us, unless you come over to California, in which case, which is, that's why he was so sure that he had hit Asia. He just, there wasn't this charted little continent. But that's a whole different matter. That's a matter of maps, not a matter of whether or not there's a continent there.
And he ran into the American Indians.
He did, whom he called Indians because he thought he was in India. But, of course, he didn't actually land in America. He landed down in the Caribbean or
That's
the
right.
Caribbean, whichever way people want to pronounce that, those set of islands. And then proceeded to kill off the local population of Hispaniola.
As did the Spaniards.
Yeah, well.
Well, he was Italian, but...
Well, he was Italian, but he was working for the
Spaniards.
Spanish.
Yes. Yep.
So, there's lots of really not so pretty stuff in human history that we've done in the name of progress. And scary.
Speaking of
progress, okay.
I hate to almost bring this up,
Uh-oh.
but the big story in the news was this Spanish River principal who denied the Holocaust.
Yeah, well.
He has since been fired, by the way.
I understand.
Obviously did not have history courses.
Yeah, it's... So... You like when I talk about my classes, like the class that I talked about yesterday in my lecture yesterday, we were talking about the importance of critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Critical thinking is the ability to solve problems. It's not memorizing one set of formulas to apply to one set of problems, and then you can solve that set of problems with that set of equations. Critical thinking is the skill to look at things and figure out how to figure out the answer. right? It's the difference between, in the video, what it says, you can either give somebody a fish or teach them how to fish. Teaching people how to think critically and logically and use data is to give them the skills. Because if people don't have critical thinking, then they're going to believe whatever they want to and whatever they're told. They're not willing to challenge those things. Right? You know, and one of the questions that I ask in the class is, you know, can you be a theist and believe in evolution? And the answer is yes, you can. Because if you can't, I'm in trouble. Because I don't hold God to a 24-hour day. I figure God figures out what God's day is, not me. And I can live with that. I can live with not knowing and not pinning God down, you know, with a thumbtack on the wall, because that's not going to work anyway if God's shapeless, formless, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I don't have a problem with that kind of ambiguity. I'm enough of a scientist that I don't think I know all the answers. And I don't have to know all the answers. I like to know answers, and that's why I am a researcher and a scientist, because I'm trying to figure out a lot of things. But as most scientists and researchers discover pretty quickly, the more you learn, the more questions you have. Right? So the most important piece in my research is, what are the questions that it now opens, you know, that I didn't know to ask before I did the research. Yeah.
Why are there so many atheist scientists around? It doesn't seem to make sense.
I think most of that really has to do with the definition of God, more than real atheism. What do I mean by that?
Well, you're either an atheist or not, right?
Well, yeah, some people call themselves atheists, and they just have different gods.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I know I've talked about it. I've got a good friend who calls herself an atheist, but she believes in God, and she believes, you know, that life continues and all these other things. And it's like, so your God's name is love. And she and I have had that discussion. And, you know, so he said, you need to translate the prayers. And so you don't say God, you say love. You know, blessings come from love. That makes sense, actually. Right? Because and there's a whole series of books out there with God is the potential of love. God needs us in order to have something to love and something to love God back.
Okay.
Or hath God a dog. So what most people who are atheists reject is the idea of an old man with a beard on a throne. Well, I reject that too. That's not God to me. Right? I start out with a definition that says God is the force that causes us to breathe.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, the force of life.
Yeah.
And, you know, everything after that is a function of experience and definition.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't have a problem with somebody who says life just happened. Okay, well, the force that caused that to happen is God. Right? It's the source of life. God is the source of life. And we'll start there. And in a lot of ways, we can end there as well. And, you know, and you get into trouble when you start to pin God down. And this sounds like really funny, but when you say that God is omniscient, knows everything, you're actually pinning God down. When you say God is all-powerful, you're pinning God down. Because if God is all-powerful, then there's really no point to creation.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Right. And, you know, if we want to have free will, if we don't have free will, we're not responsible for what we do. Right? Because if you're not free to make a choice, then even if you murder somebody, it's not you, it's whatever predetermined you were going to do that. Okay? These things get really very, very deep very quickly.
Predetermination is Presbyterian.
I understand. And so if you push somebody on what does predetermined mean, that God knows, God's knowledge of what you're going to do does not mean that God defines what you're going to do.
Ooh. Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
What that means is that God is not bound to our straight line time. And again, I don't have a problem with that. I can understand that I can't get off of my plane of existence where time goes in one or maybe, back and forth in one direction, but I can't take it perpendicular off the timeline. I'm just not geared or facilitated enough to be able to warp things that way. Because to me it would appear as a warp. And somebody else, some other entity that's not bound by that, I can accept that I'm more limited than other things are. I'm, hopefully more advanced and more something or other than an earthworm, right? So there's a continuum in life.
Mm-hmm.
Because the earthworm's still alive, and they struggle to live. They do all their little earthworm things. I don't know how much they think or don't think or feel or don't feel. We can sit and try to define nerve endings and brain stems and all that other stuff. But even just the complexity within humans is so huge. I don't even want to really... I know that my dog has emotions. I know that my dog learns things. How much does it know? What does it know? Yeah, those are bigger questions. And, it's not yet really answering that for me. So, and I think we've got somebody who's actually called in. Rick from PSL, thank you for calling.
Good morning, Rabbi. How are you today?
I am doing well, Rick. And again, thank you for calling.
I haven't had the greatest of the last month and a half or so. It seems like one bad thing after another happens. And I was listening to you speak this morning, and I'm a true believer in God doesn't do these things. I mean, that's somebody else doing these things to us.
Often us, but yeah, go on.
It's often us. When you were talking, and I think this is part of the problem, when you were talking about free will, I thought to myself something that was told to me a long time ago by a wise old man named Jimmy Driscoll, who was on the radio in this area many, many years ago. I'm sure probably Greg or Carol know of him. Anyway, he said, the only thing I really own, the only thing I have to give, and the only thing that he wants from me is for me to turn my free will over to him. And I thought that was pretty profound.
Okay.
I try to do that every day,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems like some days I take it back again, and when I do, I get in the way and everything goes wrong. I did an exercise one time about all the monumentally wonderful things that ever happened to me, and I wrote them down on a piece of paper, and then I turned the paper over, and I wrote down all the monumentally terrible things that ever happened to me.
Ouch.
And I found out I was very busy on that one side of the paper where the terrible things were going on. And on the other side where the wonderful things were going on, I wasn't doing anything. I was just there. I wasn't trying to fix or control anything
I got
or
you.
anyone.
It's when you were trying to run the world that you got in trouble.
Yeah, well, we like to run the show, of course.
Right.
When it doesn't go our way, we know that, we might be a little bit at fault, but everybody else is more to blame than us.
Uh-huh. Sure.
It's their fault, not mine.
Uh-huh.
So,
yeah,
but I've stopped being the victim. I mean, I understand that bad things happen. It says somewhere in the book I read that it rains on the just and the unjust.
Yeah.
And I believe that today, and I just have to accept that why ever these things have been happening to me over the past month and a half or so, I think that he has something fabulous in store for me, because he wouldn't have kept me around this long.
So I'll give you my personal take on some of that. So I'm having
a little trouble hearing you, ma'am.
So I was going to say I'm going to answer a little bit of that. You had mentioned, I'm going to recap it real quickly for those that aren't hearing it.
I'm going to hang up and listen to your response, ma'am, because I'm having trouble hearing. I think it's my car phone.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate that.
Car phones are difficult.
Yeah, car phones do make it a challenge. So Rick asked the question, about when good things and bad things happen. And, when the good things happen, you're just kind of there. And when the bad things happen, very often it's because you've kind of mixed your finger into what's going on and trying to control everything. That's a really short synopsis of what Rick was saying. And so I'm going to counter that with a little bit of kind of my perception of things, which is, Rick cited the line that says it rains on the just and the unjust, but is rain bad? Right? To ascribe rain as bad is part of the problem. Rain is necessary. I don't like it personally. It's part of why I enjoyed when I lived in Tucson, because it didn't do a lot of that. And it was fun when it rained. Used to go out and watch,
Sure.
watch
Oh, yeah.
the Taco Verde actually flow.
There is a river there.
There is a river, yeah, once in a while. And you got to live in that area to understand that one.
Yeah.
As opposed to the canal in the back, which always has water and frogs and everything else, and alligators and all those other wonderful things. But rain is not bad. Rain is part of life. It just is. And, if I'm comfortable in my house and in my bed and everything's wonderful, the rain is welcome to come as much as it wants, as long as it doesn't blow the house down, right? Which hurricanes, of course, will and have done, as do tornadoes and other natural events. They're just extremes of the natural circumstance. They're not good or bad, although they are for individuals. But they, in and of themselves, are just part of the natural system of the planet. And so is death. Right? All organisms die. Trees die. Earthworms die. Humans die. God's not out there punishing every earthworm for whatever and causing it to die. Death is something that you are going to do once you become alive.
Okay, we bring another wrinkle into this.
Okay.
You always hear people say, why does God allow these mass shootings?
Because God gave us free will. And if God, who can do anything, right, has decided to give humans free will, that means God no longer can control everything, right? Because if you have a
Makes
limit,
sense.
right? If you have, you can be so bad, but you can't be this bad, then you don't really have free will. Right? And then you're back to the, you only did what God allowed, so therefore you're not responsible. All of those arguments are aimed at getting you off the hook for taking responsibility for your action.
Yeah.
But if God truly gives us free will, and I believe that God does, and I believe that the wickedness that humans do is a function of our free will. Because we don't have to do those things. We don't have to ever do those things. Now you're going to say, well, what about the mentally ill? The mentally ill can get help. And if we as a culture are not tuned in to each other and to the problems that we have in order to run interventions to help people who are feeling compelled to do things that are hurtful, then we're missing a boat too. It doesn't make us responsible for their actions, but it does make us interactive to them.
And we haven't been tuned into that for
We haven't
60 years.
Only 60. I think it's
maybe it's longer than that.
Longer than
Yeah,
that, right?
yeah.
I mean, you just asked. We just talked about a Holocaust denier, and I really wish that the Holocaust was the only genocide of that magnitude that's ever been, and it's not.
You still got it going on in
It's
Africa.
still going on. It's going on today. And Jews say never again. And I wish we really would do more for that, and really somehow motivate the planet to have this consciousness shift that says it's not okay to do that. It's not okay to destroy God's creatures. Period. End of statement. All of God's creation, all humans, are beautiful, magnificent creatures. Some of us need a little more help than others, but we're all beautiful, magnificent creatures, and we're all entitled to be treated as human beings. And that means not whacking you off because you happen to be the child of your parents. You didn't pick that,
Mm-hmm.
or at least not not in a way that should make you liable to be killed, just for the sake of who gave you genetic material. That's just not fair. And I know that the world is not fair, but there's a point at which we have to start being a little more fair with each other, because we can't ask the world to be fair if we're not fair. And so, no, God didn't say it's okay to run around and kill people. I don't think that at all. I think God cries. And that's an allegory, obviously, but I think God cries that humans haven't figured this out yet.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're getting better. I believe we're getting better. But it's like, 2 steps forward and 1 step backward, the Eschenach March. We've got a long way to go to really understanding what it takes to be a partner to God. What does it take to be part of God's creation, God, and listening, that thing that Rick talked about? He says he wants to be able to hear God and give God his own free will, in other words, do God's work on earth. And I like to think that I'm trying to do that as well. I think most people are. I think the biggest challenge, some people may not care, right? They may not care. And some people have too narrow a me or instead of a we. They kind of like get their M and W flipped up. That's an English version.
Oh, name one person who would be
yeah.
like that.
I'm not going there. I'm not going there.
I know what you're saying.
But right. And most people don't set out to say, well, let me see how much evil I can do today. That's just not the way humans are made. Most humans seem to be wired to want to do good. And you don't have to be religious to want to do what's right because it's right. And to do, to be moral. Right? Socrates was not a Christian, and he said, how ought we to live? Right? He's the one who started what's considered, he's considered the founder of ethics. How ought we to live? What should we do? And, again, I'm teaching Intro to Ethics in the summer program at IRSC. And there's not just one approach, and they don't agree by a long shot. One says, well, we should have the greatest happiness. But then, then becomes the question of, well, what's happiness and whose happiness matters? Right? And the easy answer is, well, it should be the greatest happiness. Well, that means chocolate ice cream for those who like chocolate ice cream. And
so how do your students react to that? What is happy to...
that discussion is next week. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, stand by.
Oh,
Stand by
what?
for next week.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about consequentialist and non-consequentialist, deontological, all of those great different systems. And as I tell them, they have a great assignment. They have one that I think you'll like, which is, it's called the Politician's Paper. They have to take a Democrat and a Republican, and they have to analyze 2 to 3 fallacies in their published statements or public speech that this politician has given. And I have to not be able to know if the person writing the paper is a Democrat or a Republican when I read it. So, in other words, they've got to treat both their own party and the other parties. I'm assuming that most of the students are binary and either Democrats or Republicans. Obviously, we've got some folks that aren't. We've got a whole group of students who probably have not really started to become political and may not really even be aware. But they've got to do this analysis because fallacies
Interesting.
are,
Okay.
yeah, it's a fun paper always to read. And so an ongoing discussion. But, right, so getting back to it, ethics is something that humans are wired to do. We're wired people know that it's not right to steal. People know that. Do people justify when they steal? Yeah, usually. They come up with all kinds of reasons as to why they did it. They needed it. They did.
Right,
There's rationales. And sometimes you're lying to yourself and you know it. But you're going to do it because it helps you do what you're doing. You're satisfying human needs. And there are basic human needs. And I don't have enough time in 5 minutes to go into human needs.
I was going to say that. That's a whole different show.
That's a whole... Maybe we'll do that next Maybe we'll do that next show. We'll talk a little bit about human needs. There's a couple of models that are out there that I happen to like. Not Maslow's as much. Maslow's is fine. It works. But there are a number of other models that describe the human needs. We have very, very strong human needs. Some of those are ego, right? Some of those are survival. But we all have these needs, and everybody has slightly different needs. Some needs are more important to one or another. That's personality and who and what you are, and the toolbox that you have equipped to live your life is how you try to meet those needs. So that does sound like a really good topic for next week. I'll put that on my calendar. Next week is needs, human needs, and how that plays into the discussion. So getting back and coming full circle, so if God is that which gives us breath, and that God is conscious, well, that's a function of whether or not you perceive that and experience that and understand it. Agnostics, a lot of people that get labeled as atheists are really agnostics. They simply don't know, and they're reserving judgment until such time as they learn more and can understand it. That's an agnostic. A lot of agnostics get lumped in with atheists.
Oh God, if there is a God, save my soul if I have a soul.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and that, you know, it's a funny kind of thing. There was a long period in my life where I considered myself agnostic because I wasn't sure that God existed. I just wasn't, but I prayed.
How can you be an agnostic Jew?
Oh, very easily. You can even be an atheist Jew.
See, I just don't get that. I don't get that
because
at all.
Judaism doesn't have a you have to believe. We're a seeking religion. That's the difference. We're seekers. The holiness is in the seeking, not in having found or having to find or pin God down.
Okay.
All right. So, Judaism is a religion that says we know a lot of things that God isn't. Right? And beyond that, God is what gives your life meaning. That's Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan's phrase out of Judaism as a civilization. There's a whole lot of different ways to look at it. Maimonides said the only thing we can know about God is that God is unknowable.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So, we're trying to deal with some kind of a concept of an entity or a force or a something. I'm going to say a something for lack of any, language is so finite that it's really hard to describe something that goes beyond, that's transcendent, beyond our senses, right? Because you can't smell God, you can't feel God, you can't touch God. You can feel God's presence, but you can't touch it, you can't hug it. And, how and where, pinning all of that down with language is so difficult, with our finite minds is so difficult. And so Judaism is a seeking religion. We say we don't know the answers, but let's get together and try to find some. And you're welcome to join us any Friday night at 7:30 or Saturday mornings on No Stolen Moments for July and August, so services at 10:30. This is Rabbi Shafir Lobb of Congregation Eitz Chayim, and this has been Ask a Rabbi.
Boy, I'd love to take your class at IRSC. This is absolutely fascinating. You've been listening to Ask a Rabbi right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie. WPSL.com, webcaster to the world, on Alexa and Google Home.